Hello, students. How are you? I hope everything is very well and everything is pretty well with you. And this is the second session of multicultural education course. And in this session, I want to address four basic issues. The first one is the concept of multicultural education. In this main title, I will try to address the nature of multicultural education, the definition of multicultural education, and the goals of multicultural education. Second, or next to that, I will address the issue of historical development of multicultural education. Thirdly, I will address the issue of main dimensions of multicultural education. And finally, I will highlight the issue of the concept of school system, school as a social system. So I hope before I start the second session, I hope you enjoyed the previous session, the previous lesson I sent you through your Telegram group. Primarily, you need to remember what we have addressed in our first session. That is the concept of human being as a foundation of multicultural education, as it helps you to make a good connection with the second lesson. You have to understand those issues that we discuss, especially in relation to the nature of human being as a cultural being and as a social being. So, by remembering that, I want to start today's lesson or second lesson by allowing you to think one basic issue, that is, think the position of you or your position as a human being, as a cultural being, and as a social being, and how your nature as a social being and a cultural being affects the way you think, the way you behave, and the way you act in the society, because it helps you to understand the concept of multicultural education and its influence in educational policy and the practice as well. Having said this and having this in mind, when I come to the second session and the first title of second session, which is about the concept of multicultural education, to start from the nature, multicultural education is primarily conceptualized in three ways. First, the first is multicultural education as an idea. The second is multicultural education as a school reform. And the third concept is multicultural education as a process or as a progress. Multicultural education, or whenever you understand the concept of multicultural education, you have to understand in these three ways. As an idea, multicultural education is an idea which promotes or which tells us that all students have the right to education regardless of their difference in terms of social background, economic background, political background, and cultural background. So this is one form of understanding the concept of multicultural education. The second is understanding multicultural education as a school reform. As a school reform, multicultural education is a movement which urges or which focused on changing the school structure so that it will be responsive for diversity that students bring to the school setting. So it changes, it helps the nations to change the structure of school so that it will be responsive to the diversity and the differences that students and teachers as human beings brings to the education setting. The third conceptualization of multicultural education is a process. So as a process, multicultural education is a progressive approach. It's a progressive approach which promotes the continuous assurance of education quality for all students regardless of their background. So it is not an idea which we perform at one time. It is an ongoing project. It is a continuous project of satisfying the needs of students, the needs of educational personnel, which may come from the change in the society due to different issues. Particularly, it might be due to the advancement in technology, it might be due to the change in economic and social as well as political status of the society. So, having conceptualizing multicultural education this way, the next thing is how, therefore, we can define multicultural education. In fact, many scholars define the concept of multicultural education in different ways, but which I tell you now is the general and which involves all definitions given by the scholars. The specific definitions will be remain for you. You can read for yourself. So generally, we can define multicultural education as an educational approach which promotes the policy and the practice that facilitate the students or all learners to reach their fullest potential and to be aware of their context, whether it is local context, national, and global context. Because students are different, multicultural education helps and promotes the policy and the practice which help the student to reach their fullest potential regardless of their difference. Next to that, it is an educational approach which helps the students to understand the context and the influence of context, global, local, and national context in education system. So you can define multicultural education in that way in general. Having said this about the definition, to come to the goal of multicultural education, in fact, we can categorize the goal of multicultural education into two. We have an ultimate goal and specific goals. The ultimate goal of multicultural education is to bring about structural change in the society as a whole, and more specifically, multicultural education has three goals basically. The first one is transformation of self. The second one is transformation of school and schooling, and the third one is transformation of society. So multicultural education is aimed at achieving these three basic objectives. The first one is transformation of self. This is transformation is concerned with transformation of the way we think, with the way we understand the world, the way we understand the people, the way we understand as individuals the people around us is the basic and the one goal of multicultural education. Therefore, multicultural education helps individuals to examine themselves, to examine the way they think, the way they behave, the way they act in the society because of their different background. Then, unless individuals understand those issues, it is impossible to implement as well as to accept the principles of multicultural education. The second goal of multicultural education is the transformation of school and schooling. When you say the transformation of school, we mean that multicultural education needs to change the school structure, because without having the school structure which promotes the diversity, which respects and accepts diversity, it is impossible to implement the principles of multicultural education. It is impossible to give value for the diversity, value for differences. Therefore, school structure should be transformed. This is one thing. In other way, schooling is what relates to the way school community acts and they behave. Changing school structure might not be an end in itself, because people who act in the society, in the school, who work in the school, have to change their way of behaving, their way of practicing educational activities. So this is why what we call schooling. The way teachers teach the students, the way school leaders lead the school community have to be transformed. Unless there is such like transformation, it is impossible to achieve the goal of multicultural education, the ultimate goal of multicultural education, which I mentioned so far. The third specific goal of multicultural education is to transform the society as a whole. As we discussed in the first lesson, students and human being are a social being. A student as a human being are a social being. They are cultural beings. They are not born in vacuum. Therefore, they have many things to bring from their family, from their community, and from their friends. They have many experiences that they bring to the classroom. Therefore, unless we change the society, it is very impossible to change the students' thinking, the students' way of behaving, the students' way of acting. Therefore, in order to achieve the ultimate goal of multicultural education, there is a need to transform the society as a whole. The way society think, the way society accept diversity should be transformed. The way society value diversity, the way society understands people around them and the world as a whole should be transformed. So by doing this, it is possible to bring about general change in social structure. Therefore, these are some of the issues that you have to understand from the goals of and the major goals of multicultural education. Having said this about the concept of multicultural education in general, I want to proceed to the historical development of multicultural education, which is the next main title in the next session or in the second session. So, historically, there are a number of factors which initiated the emergence of multicultural education, because whenever we talk about the historical development of any discipline, it is better to start from its beginning, how it emerged first. So the concept of multicultural education is emerged due to 5 factors. The first one is the UN Human Rights Declaration of 1948. So this declaration, Article 26 of this declaration says that all individuals have the right to education regardless of their individual difference. All individuals, regardless of their social, economic, political, and physical difference, education is considered as a human right. So all have the right to education. So these issues, because primarily education has been considered as important for certain groups who have the power to rule or to govern the society. Following the declaration of UN, there was an idea, there was a shift in human thinking which promotes the idea of education as human right. So it can be considered as one factor for the emergence of multicultural education, the importance of multicultural education. The second issue is the 1960s civil rights movement, which followed the Declaration of United Nations. In 1960s, there were a number of movements. You can take the feminist movement or women movement, which focused on the right of women and the right of female in general. And you can also take the movement of black people, which focused on the right of black. Therefore, this movement give a base, a foundation for the emergence of multicultural education, because whenever we talk about the rights, whenever we talk about the right of groups who are marginalized in the society, we talk about how to integrate them in the general society and the dominant society. Therefore, this issue also gave a basic foundation for the emergence of multicultural education. Following this movement, there are as a third factors, there are a number of declaration and agreements internationally made following the movement of civil rights, particularly after 1970s. There are a number of international agreements, and there are a number of international declarations. For example, you can take the declaration on the right of children, you can take the declaration on the right of women, you can take the declaration on the right of people with disability, you can take also the declarations on adult, for example, the right of adult people. So these all declarations followed the civil rights movement of 1960s. Not only this, there are different international agreements. For example, you can take the education for all agreement. It was the worldwide movement to provide education for all. You can also take agreement on Millennium Development Goals. Even you can take the recent one. So this agreement, this general agreement, international agreement, facilitate the development of multicultural education, because they focus on assuring the equal distribution, the equal advantage of the people, regardless of the difference they have in nature, because of their culture, social, and economic background. And the fourth main reason and factor that contributed for the development of multicultural education is the general change in society. This change, the rapid change, has been in place in the global society due to different factors. Therefore, there are different in social aspects. There has been different in economic aspect. There has been also different in political aspect. Political shift in political ideology has been taking place from time to time. For example, before 1960s or 1970s, around that, the monarchical system of governance was in place. But after that, the emergence of democratic system took the place. The emergence of this socialism and communism ideology took the place. Therefore, these issues can be considered as basic foundation for the emergence of multicultural education. And the fifth one is The increasing interdependence of global society can be also considered as a factor which contributed for the development of multicultural education. Uh, our world is highly interdependent today because of uh, advancement in technology and because of globalization. Therefore, these issues brings about a very complex nature of the world environment. So multicultural education has emerged in response to these issues, in response to the complex diversity, and in response to uh, the international agreements and declarations on human rights. The multicultural education is emerged as a discipline which helps the nation to be responsive for these issues. So these are some of the facts that you have to understand about. So multicultural education is emerging in response to these issues. First, it is emerged as a response to discrimination in terms of color, discrimination in terms of gender, as I said you so far. For example, there was gender discrimination during 1960s. That's why the feminist movement was in place. There was also discrimination in terms of color. That's why the movement of black people was in place. So, in the beginning, multicultural education was emerged as a response to discrimination. But later on and today, multicultural education is in place to help the nation to be responsive for diversity, continuing diversity due to advancement of technology and due to globalization. Diversity is happening from time to time. Diversity is continuing from time to time. New form of diversity emerge from day to day because of advancement of technology. So unless there is a system which helps people or nation to be responsive for this diversity, including education, it is impossible to bring about a social change in general. And therefore, multicultural education can be understood in that way. So following this, when it first emerged, multicultural education make a number of discipline or use as a number of discipline as a base because it is founded on many disciplines. That's why it is considered as a multidisciplinary field of study. For example, you can take in education, multicultural education has an aspect of history of education. It also has an aspect of sociology of education. It also has an aspect of philosophy of education. For example, to see one by one, philosophically, you can relate multicultural education with pragmatism worldview, pragmatism philosophy, which focus on changing, which focus on solving the problem of the society at hand, which focus on solving the problem of the society, which emerges from different factors I mentioned so far. From theoretical base, for example, you can mention constructivist theory, you know it. So constructivist theory promotes the consideration of all students in teaching learning process, and it gives the right for individuals students to construct their own knowledge. It promotes the idea that students are not bare-minded. Students have the experience that they bring from the society, from the culture, from the family, from the way they live, the place, the environment where they live. They do have the experience to bring to the school setting. So this experience should be valued according to the constructivist theory. Therefore, multicultural education also The goal of multicultural education also overlaps with this, the assumption of this theory as well. Even on the aspect of approach, you can relate the issue of multicultural education with humanistic approach. If you take, for example, organizations like USAID, they promote humanistic approach of social service, which means it gives such like approach gives value for individual difference, for humanity. Therefore, multicultural education uh, therefore based on a number of theories, philosophical views, and approaches, which is working in different field of study today. So currently, having these issues as a base, currently multicultural education has become an independent and multidisciplinary field of study in education system. Um, Having said this about um, the historical development of multicultural education, to say some issues about dimensions of multicultural education, which are derived from the goals of multicultural education. There are 5 dimensions of multicultural education. The first dimension is content integration. The first dimension is content integration. The second dimension is knowledge construction. The third is prejudice reduction. And the fourth is equity pedagogy. And the fifth dimensions of multicultural education is empowering school culture and social structure. So when we say we implement the principles of multicultural education, we mean that we focus on these 5 dimensions. The first one is content integration, as I said so far. Content integration you can understand content integration in 2 ways. What is designed in the education system of a given nation, or what a student in the classroom specifically can be understood in 2 ways. First, content is there and the learning experience is there. For example, content means the facts, the principles, the procedures, and the rules, the histories the students learn in the classroom, which are designed, which are included in the textbook, in the reference book, in the teacher book, and the student books are considered as a content. This might be a fact, it might be a procedure, it might be principles, it might be a rule, it might be also a procedures. This is content. The other way of content integration is learning experiences. Learning experience means the way the content presented on the materials, the way the content that people or scholars want to convey for students are presented on the text are another dimension to integrate the content. For example, the examples that are listed on the textbook, on the materials, the illustrations, the stories have to be given value. Let me give you one example only from this aspect. For example, if one person, if for example one content of language course, take the English language for example, the textbook wants to teach about tense, let's say. So tense is the content of English language. What the scholar, the writer wants to teach students is about tense. So in order to, for example, teach about tense or present the content of tense, they may use some illustrations. They may use examples. For example, in order to teach past tense, for example, one may use a sentence constructed with somebody. For example, Gamachu did like this, Gamada did like this, Ayele did like that. So whenever you take an examples, those examples have their own indications. For example, if the writer took name from, consider that Ethiopia is a country with different ethnic groups. If the writer used the name from only one nation, for example, one nation state, for example, from Oromia, it might be from Amara, it might be from South, it might be. Therefore, the indication is that the remaining, the voice of remaining ethnic group is undermined. Therefore, there should be a very, very critical consideration in presenting or in organizing the learning experience as well as the content. Not only that, if there is a history to be included in the textbook, for example, and if the textbook only focus on the history of a certain group by undermining others group history, this might be a very serious issue that have to be considered in the principles of multicultural education. Therefore, that's why one dimension of multicultural education is to challenge such like discriminations which can be exhibited in different materials in the form of content integration and learning experiences. The next dimension of multicultural education is the knowledge construction. So as you can understand from the name, knowledge construction is about the way teachers help students to construct their knowledge. Primarily, teachers were considered as knowledgeable and as individuals who know everything, while students were considered as empathy-minded, who are responsible only to listen to the teachers. Therefore, if we help students to construct their knowledge in that way, the experience of the students which they bring from the family, from the community is undermined. Therefore, there should be an environment, there should be a situation where teachers also give value for the experience that students bring to the classroom. That is why multicultural education principles challenge the way knowledge constructing process take place. The way students construct their knowledge matters. The way teachers help students to construct the knowledge should be examined in terms of multicultural education principles. So this is another dimension. The third one is prejudice reduction. Prejudice reduction. This is multicultural education also concerned with reducing prejudice, reducing discrimination. It might be discrimination in terms of expression. For example, let me give you one example. Primarily, for example, the responsibility of earning income is given to boys or man, whereas responsibility to work at home is given to women or girl. Therefore, such like expression promotes discrimination. Therefore, such like discrimination, such like prejudice should not be included in the education system in general. Therefore, multicultural education also challenges such like expression, the expression which undermines the practice, which undermines particular ethnic group, particular group of the society, whether it is a social group, whether it is economic group, or whether it is a language group as well. So this is what we call prejudice reaction. And the fourth dimension of multicultural education is equity pedagogy. In equity pedagogy, we mean that multicultural education also concerned about the pedagogy which is responsive for diverse culture. You can call it cultural responsive pedagogy. When you say cultural responsive pedagogy, as I said you, as I mentioned earlier, is our students may come from different background in terms of language, religious beliefs, culture, and economic status as well. So the pedagogy that teachers use in the classroom, when you say pedagogy, it includes the materials that teachers use, it includes the methods that teachers use, it also includes the assessment techniques that teachers use in the classroom, should be free from any form of discrimination. It should be responsive for cultural diversity. For example, the words, if to give you one example, for example, some words are taboo in a particular society group, whereas it is formal in another societal group. So teachers as teachers or school leaders have to take care of those issues, because the culture of all have to be welcomed and have to be respected in a school setting, in particularly in multicultural school setting. So this is all about the concern of equity pedagogy. The fifth dimension of multicultural education is empowering school culture. As I said you, as I mentioned earlier, empowering school, meaning changing the structure of the school, changing the environment of the school, is one aspect of implementing multicultural education, one concern of multicultural education. For example, in order to involve, in order to make a school responsive to children with disability, for example, the school environment should be appropriate for free mobilization. For example, some of our students might be physically disabled, so those students needs a kind of fertile ground to move from one place to another place. Therefore, in that case, our students, our school environment need to be appropriate for all. Not only that, for example, you can take the building, school building itself. For example, if there are physically handicapped or physically disabled individuals, and if our building is a very long building, for example, it might not be appropriate for those students. Therefore, such like issues should be considered in a school environment. Not only that, not only school environment, the school policy itself, the school regulation, the school policy is there. So the school policy should consider the culture of all students. It should not promote the culture of certain groups. It should equally treat students from all many backgrounds. For example, it might be in terms of religion, as I said before. Not only that, even the group formation in the classroom itself should consider such like cultural differences among students. So this is what we call empowering school culture. Another thing is empowering social structure, as I tried to mention it so far. As I said, students are not born in vacuum. They're born from family, therefore they have something to bring from the family, from the community. Directly or indirectly, the culture in which they born, the family in which they born, the people with whom they live, the environment, the language they speak, this, the religious they follow, these all things affect the way students think, the way students behave, the way students do things and think and understand the environment, the world around them. Therefore, unless there is a change in social structure, it's impossible to achieve the goal of multicultural education, in particular school setting. So This is why empowering school culture and social structure is another dimension of multicultural education. Having said this about the dimension of multicultural education, let me come to the last but not least major topic of this conversation. That is school as a social system. So why we worry about the diversity in school setting is school is a social system. School is a miniature society. School is the representation of the larger society. The difference that we observe in the larger society is also observable in the school setting, in particular school setting. Whether it is in terms of language, in terms of religious, in terms of thinking, in terms of perspective, in terms of gender, race, ethnic groups. These all difference that we observe in the larger society are also observable in the school setting. Therefore, school have to be considered as a social system rather than a single entity. It is an agency of socialization. As I said so far, socialization of children may happen at three or four more levels. First, socialization starts from family because as they born, children first make interaction with their family, and then they go to their neighbors and then come to school. So schools are considered as a social system and a socialization agency of socialization. So we have to accept, we have to reform